we have a whole world based on this. Two things. Save up. There's a good time coming. So put your money aside. Invest it. Secondly, which is somewhat contradictory, happiness consists in the possession of things. A lot of people, when they feel inadequate, bored, unfulfilled, try to get rid of this sensation by going shopping. A lot of people spend all their daytime shopping. That's the thing to do. You go out and shop. There are women galore who go into San Francisco every day just to shop and come back loaded with all kinds of things. But these things are not true material possessions for at least two reasons. Number one, most of them aren't well made. Number two, you can't use that many things. You can store them, you can put them away, you can show your friends that you've got this and that. But you can't live in 6 houses at once. You can't ride more than 2 horses at a time, unless you're doing some sort of a circus act, you know. You can't drive more than 1 car at a time. So we tend to become absolutely overloaded with possessions and have the greatest difficulty, therefore, in moving ourselves around. Because every time we move, we have to carry all the stuff with us. Let's take the comparison between a Japanese living room and a British, American, or German living room. You see the Japanese living room, you have a table and some cushions and the floor. And you don't have any beds. You sleep in a futon, in a quilt, and that's delightful. You don't, therefore, have to haul beds around. You don't have overstuffed chairs, which stand in most rooms like gun emplacements. You know, these huge things. Vast things that have to be pushed around, very heavy. We, in other words, are absolutely cluttered with enormously heavy objects. And it doesn't redound to our true material comfort, because we are always using our muscles to lug them around. They have to be taken care of. They have to be cleaned. The moths have to be kept out of them. They're a perfect pest. So we don't really understand furniture. Now, I would think furniture and a house and a shelter over you is one of the most important things in life. Shelter is fundamental. But when you see what shelter most people in the United States have provided for themselves, you're aghast. Clapboard boxes, miles and miles and miles of them, that you wouldn't want a dog to live in. Have you ever looked at the furniture in Dagwood's home? The absolutely uninspired junk. It has nothing whatsoever to recommend it. It isn't good design, it isn't fun, it's just nowhere. What's something else of material importance that really, after all, we ought to know something about? Clothes. Well, by and large, we are shockingly clothed, as compared with many other people. Men go around looking like funeral directors in the most uncomfortable survivals of military uniforms. Women wear frocks and dresses and things that are to cover up amazing systems of pulleys and blocks and tackles. And you know, it's a sleazy, and they have no real joyous color. Occasionally, I mean, we all know exceptions. But I'm talking about the generality of the culture. The clothes don't look as if anybody really enjoyed wearing them. They're worn because one has to be dressed and covered up and decent, and therefore they're worn rather apologetically. Furthermore, they wear out in nothing flat. And to buy good clothes, you have to go outside the country. There are, of course, if you want to dress in a rather traditional way, you go and get British tweeds from the Hebrides. But if you want to dress colorfully, And beautifully, you have to go to Mexico and get gorgeous materials, or to India and get silk for saris, or to Java and get batiks for sarongs. And these things will last forever. They're beautifully made by people who had a real enthusiasm about making them. Because in the life of the people who make such things, they don't make a differentiation between working and playing. But in a culture where you work and play is different, you work in order to make money to play. This is insane, because you spend most of the time working. And then what you carry, if you don't really value the work, I mean, you're lucky if you've got work that you really enjoy doing. But if you don't really value the work, all you get out of it is money. Then you come home with that and you're supposed to play. Well, you're pretty tired to begin with. And we just don't play. That's all there is to it. You might play Saturday or something when there's a day off. But in the evening, very few people actually play. They sit and passively watch television. And they've got all the money in the world. I mean, compared with Hindus and Africans and so on, we live like princes. But we don't enjoy it. Not really. There's no gusto for it. You would think that people would come home and have orgies and banquets and with all that money. And they don't. It's just a sort of constant disappointment. Well, going back to clothes, I can illustrate another way in which our clothes are made without regard for material values. Most clothes are made of cloth. Now, when you weave cloth, cloth has a certain nature. It comes out in a long, wide strip, which is rectangular. We take this material, woven this way, and we try to fit it to the contours of the body by shaping, by doing things with rectangular material that rectangular material just doesn't want to do. To fit the sleeves of a man's jacket. It doesn't want to do that. And therefore, our jackets don't fold up properly. Whenever you take them out of a suitcase, they have to go to the dry cleaners to be pressed, or your wife has to iron it. Our shirts, a man's shirt is the most ridiculous construction. It will not fold unless you're an expert laundress. There's nothing you can do about it. And it always comes out of a suitcase ruffled. And it requires all kinds of care to get the thing ready to be wearable. And it's white and gets filthy and nothing flat. There's no rationale to it whatsoever. Nor to the necktie, which has to be worn with it. Sort of noose to strangle you with. But if I may point out, a Japanese kimono is quite different. It follows the nature of cloth. The rectangular forms of the cloth, if you stretch it out like that, it hangs in a rectangle right here from your sleeve, and it falls over you. It hasn't been forced to fit you, and therefore it fits you comfortably. The cloth conforms itself to you by its nature, and therefore gives you a certain dignity. I once saw a Tibetan woolen garment. It was a cloak. And it was prepared by their method, which is they have a method of pounding wool rather than weaving it. And they make it into a great big, again, it's a rectangle. And it's a double rectangle, the front one and the back one. The front one is split down the center. And at the sides, there's a place for the sleeves to go through, and beyond that, it's stitched. So you just got this sort of, if you put it out like that, it looks like a sort of sandwich board. Well, we had this one evening, and we got every man in the room to put it on. And there were about 5 men. And it turned all of them into kings. They looked absolutely regal in this thing. It was so dignified and so exquisitely beautiful. I have a Japanese friend who told me he always wore Western clothes in Japan. And I asked him why. I said, it's absurd. I said, you have the most comfortable clothes anybody ever invented. What on earth do you go around in a Western business suit for? Oh, he said, I wouldn't be seen dead in Kyoto in a kimono. You can't run for a bus in a kimono. It's true. But what a degradation, you see, of the human being. You've got to be someone who's got to run for a bus now, you see. Whereas if you put on a kimono, you're very comfortable, but you have to be leisurely. You have to stroll rather than rush. And that slows you down. Because you see, all people who are in a rush are not related to the material present. Supposing, let's take, you're in a rush to get coffee when you get up in the morning. So what do? You take instant coffee. And that's a punishment for being in a hurry. It doesn't taste of coffee, not really. So because you forced it, it's like forcing the growth of tomatoes. They don't taste of tomatoes anymore. Forced apples, they're called delicious. They're nothing but wet pith. So this is very important. This is showing that we aren't here. We're insane. We're not all there, as they say. But trying to get to something, the result, the thing we thought we wanted, the thing that we thought would be what would make us happy. You've got to get something. Now, it's true. In order to not be hungry, you have to eat. And therefore, when you eat, there's a certain satisfaction. You feel all right. But then, when you begin to consider that life is going to wear out and there are all sorts of problems, disease, change, and misfortune, and you get depressed, and then in order to feel happy, you eat when you don't need to eat, then you begin to get obesity and indigestion. And wonder why the possession of all this great food isn't doing anything for you. It's supposed to. And so in the same way with property of all kinds, when it is used to get the thing that you look forward to in the future and don't seem to have now, it becomes a complete delusion. And you can't understand because you think that the possession of these things ought to make you happy. The ad men have persuaded you that if you could get this kind of car, this kind of yacht, this kind of house, this kind of scene, whatever it may be, you should, that's the thing in life, that's what's important. And it doesn't make people happy at all, and then they wonder why it doesn't and feel cheated. And they have to go to psychoanalysts and churches and things like that to be persuaded that it's coming sometime. Somehow, the thing that is always seems to be missing. And there's nothing missing at all. Except, supposing you're absolutely starved and you just don't have the normal flow of energy through your organism, then of course you need food. Or if you're freezing, you need shelter. But in the ordinary way, when you are fed and sheltered, there isn't anything missing. It's all here. But nobody is here to see it. Everybody is wandering after something else in the distance. And of course, this is preeminently true with two other aspects of life. I've discussed housing, furniture, and clothing. But more specifically, food. In the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture is unbelievably bad when you consider it by and large. The reason being that we eat food because it's good for us. And that's a dreadful thing to do. Because it means that you look at the food from the point of view of abstract dietetics rather than concrete taste. And wherever dietitians get interfering with cooking, it is utterly destroyed. In every university. In every university from coast to coast, where you would think would be centers of culture, the institutional food is unbelievably abominable. And the scholars are ashamed to come out about it because and protest and lay down the law because they're supposed to be devoted to higher things. And after all, what you eat, just so long as it's got the right chemicals in it, isn't very important. But what this is, you see, the trouble with that is two things. To eat in order to live, sort of that it's good for you, is, what do you mean good for you? It means that it helps you to go on into the future. But what is the point of going on into the future when all the meals ahead of you are these unappetizing things that are just going to enable you to go on into the future? And the second thing is that eating in this spirit is very disrespectful to all the creatures you have killed in order to eat. It's even disrespectful to an onion to eat it improperly. Onions are living creatures, and if you cut up an onion for dinner, you should reverence the onion. You should respect it, because if you don't have a feeling of love for the onion, for the fish, for whatever you eat, you won't cook it properly, and you won't enjoy it. Cooking is a process of loving. And it is a paying of respect to these marvelous beings which we ingest in order to go on living. So this entirely futuristic, dietetic attitude to food is, again, you see, a question of purely quantitative thinking, of lack of relation to the material world.